You're listening to the PoolePRoof Wisdom Podcast, where we bring our authentic selves, refuse to raise grown folks, and share wisdom you can use. With your host, Charles K. Poole.
One of my favorite things to do is to engage with people who have a reason for life other than just being here walking around on the planet. Now, for me, that's exciting because I think that everyone has a story to tell, and I'm always interested in what those stories are. But I'm even more intrigued when that person feels that that story requires them to do something that puts more good into this old world than they take from it. Well, I came across such a person in Alex Giarrante through a former colleague of mine who happens to be his uncle, and that former colleague worked at Anheuser-Busch as I did many, many years ago. Alex is a new author, and he wrote a book that he is so passionate about because it's about helping people to remember the importance and value of pursuing your desire so that you can lead the life that you want to lead. That, of course, was immediately interesting to me because I believe that we all have to make individual choices to get to the point where we can lead exactly that kind of life. It seems that when we're talking about desire, his desire is to serve. And so I'm going to be looking very much forward to this conversation today with Alex Giarrante, the author of Desire Unleashed. Hi, Alex, and thanks for joining us on the podcast today. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, Charles. I am thrilled to be here with you and excited for this conversation.
I am, of course, very pleased to have this opportunity to speak with you, particularly when I found out what you were going to be creating a book about and had the chance to read it. And of course, your uncle, who is a good former colleague of mine, if he says that it was worth the effort, of course, I'm going to take the time to read it. And it turned out, guess what? He was right. So that's a good sign.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So, Alex, here's the thing. You're talking about this very broad subject as a first-time author, and you're still a relatively young man. I won't even say relatively. You're still a young man. So you have this perspective about pursuing your desire in life. And a lot of people may say, well, you're still young. You don't necessarily know what that means yet. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, definitely. I think the big thing that we don't realize is as we're growing up and as we are young children, we actually have that burning desire in us. And we don't realize it, but we have all these outside influences, whether it's our parents, family, friends, relatives, whatever it is. And they're programming us to think a certain way and believe certain things. I'm a big believer, and I've studied the topic of paradigms, which a gentleman named Bob Proctor has been my main teacher for this. And he always talks about how you have these burning desires, but for some reason, society as a whole seems to push them down and tell you that there's one way to go about life, or there's one way to go about pursuing success. And about 10 years ago, I had a little bit of an issue with this, and I wanted to understand why people were successful. And so desire really, to me, is the starting point of all achievement. And that's what 10 years later led me to writing this book.
So in that 10-year period, you've done a lot of work to research and personally understand what desire means, not just in terms of the larger context of it, but to you personally. I'd mentioned in the introduction that you recently became a father. Tell me about that in alignment with what you learned over that 10-year period that certainly cemented the idea that you wanted to do something that was going to help other people, particularly your child as they grow to adulthood eventually, understand the value of pursuing your desires despite whatever the limitations the world wants to place on you may be.
Yeah. So my upbringing, I'm not going to say that I didn't have a good upbringing or didn't have good parents, but my situation was unique where I lost my biological mother to alcoholism. And so I had a little bit of shaky upbringing the first 6 years of my life. And they say that's when a lot of your mindset is programmed into your subconscious mind. And it really impacted me in a negative way until my early 20s, when I really started to dive into some of those, the dark matter, if you will.
Right.
And what I realized was it doesn't really matter where you come from. What matters is that you have a plan for where you're going. And so my desire in my 20s was to just find a job and have a steady job and be able to provide for myself. But I was really unhappy, you know? And I picked up the book Think and Grow Rich, which I told you a little bit about.
Right.
And the title can be a little deceitful because a lot of people think of rich as money.
Right.
And really, being rich is about your mindset and having your purpose figured out. And really, I'm a believer in God, and I believe that all of us have a spirit within us, and that spirit is yearning for fuller expression. And so in my 20s, when I picked up that book, I was working a seasonal job. I was not making very much money. I was grinding away. There was a point where I was unemployed, and I started applying these principles. And the first principle in that book is desire. And so I started studying how to figure out what my desire was. And I learned very quickly that, one, I like to understand how things worked. And I got into manufacturing and building. And I really like to see things start from nothing and be created into something great. So I ended up getting a job as an assistant operations manager for a steel manufacturing plant. And my favorite part of that job was leading people. I had a team of about 100 people on my plant floor. And I realized very quickly that my purpose in life was to help other people that had a similar background that I did, that maybe came from a not so good place, but to show them and teach them that you can really do anything.
Right.
And you fast forward 10 years, and my wife got pregnant, and now my son just turned 9 months old. And the past 18 months, really, when I found out my wife got pregnant, that burning desire came back. And I guess you could say it came back because I had spent the previous 8 years in that job, and I kind of lost connection with my purpose just over the time period of going to work every day, the 9 to 5, just grinding it out. And so I wrote a goal card that I wanted to be able to help people escape a prison, if you will, of a poverty mindset and a negative thinking mindset. And 2 years later, I had an opportunity come to me to start doing this full time and to start teaching people success principles. So that's kind of how my desire was rediscovered and how I got to this point, which I'm relatively new at this, but I've never felt such a connection and such a spiritual connection with God that I know that this is my purpose.
That is a very compelling story, Alex. And I want to step back just a little bit about that point where you were so focused on doing the work, the day job and these types of things. I think that people believe that desire, once you are aware of what that desire is just ever present. But what you're talking about is the fact that even though you can have a desire, there are circumstances which, of course, can lead to it being dormant for a while, and you have to kind of re-energize it. Is that what you're indicating?
100%, Charles. That is, I think with my studying of desire, the first principle from that book, I really realized that it's something you have to continuously work at every day. And you have to plant it in your subconscious mind to the point where you almost have this obsession with living it out. and not an obsession in a bad way, because you have to have balance, but you have, that's what you wake up thinking about. It's what you go to bed thinking about. And ultimately, you know what your purpose is, to serve the world. But yeah, it's the world's tough, right? And there's a lot of negativity, especially nowadays with social media and all the stuff online. And, you turn on the TV and it really kind of pulls you away from that. So to answer your question directly, yes, it's getting to your desire is not easy, but keeping it is even harder.
When you're talking about the desire, I'm reading here now from the book, and you give a definition of it, but I like this paragraph in particular. Desire is the driving force behind our actions, decisions, and goals. Desire is what motivates us to strive for our dreams and aspirations. It can be anything from achieving financial success, finding true love, to simply having more happiness in our lives. I think that definition is very important, particularly given something that you just said about your faith, and you have a belief in God. You have a desire to help other people. You have a desire to better the life that you're living, not just for yourself, but for your family. But I do think that the basic belief that a lot of people have is that when you're talking about desire, it's something intangible. You can't get your brain around it. You can't put your hands on it. It's just a conceptual idea that you can't really apply other than perhaps in what you and I do, self-help books and self-help conversations. How do you address those people who think that desire is not in alignment with leading a full and productive life? How do you address those people?
Yes, great question. That one, I get challenged on that a lot when I'm having these kind of conversations with people who are a little bit different of a mindset. And that's okay. That's a great part of the conversation. But really, I think, see, that's a good one.
Go ahead, think through it.
Yeah. Repeat that one more time.
Well, primarily, how do you get through to the people who, of course, think that desire is something that they can't really comprehensively understand? It's just conceptual. It's not something tangible.
Yeah. It reminds me of that gentleman, Bob Proctor, who is one of my best mentors, who really got me fired up to learn about this stuff. But he talks about desire being the internal feeling you have that's expressing, or that's outwardly expressing in the physical form. And so, yeah, I do think desire is internal, but when you figure out how to express it through physical form, that's where it becomes tangible. And this is where I kind of go back to when I talked about paradigms towards the beginning of the conversation. We're programmed to believe that those desires aren't achievable, even if they're, crazy or they sound outside the box. I don't believe in a box. I think anybody can do anything. And what you'll realize is when you discover what your desire is, your desire actually starts working towards you as you work towards it. And so that's where it starts to become tangible. And I think people miss that. They're so busy looking for the gold that they miss the silver lining during the journey. And that's where it becomes tangible, is those little steps of growth, those little steps of progress. I think that is where it's tangible. So it starts out as an idea, right? I had an idea to write this book, and it started with journaling. And I had no idea how I was going to do it. I had no idea how it would become in physical form, but I knew if I planted that idea and I started just working towards it, that it would happen. And it's just an example to answer your question of, it starts off as an idea, but it becomes, it manifests itself into physical form as you work towards it.
Right. I think it's important to hear that and to say that for a lot of people, because what I've found, Alex, is, we talk about faith all the time, and desire and faith go hand in hand. What's interesting to me is the number of people who, of course, have no issue with giving full opportunity to what I call the inner saboteur, that thing about yourself that always tells you no or that you're not worthy. We are often our own worst enemies, right? And as a result, when we do have desires, we talk ourselves out of more shit than the law allows, right? Because we tell ourselves we can't do things. And we do that not only because of the impact of the world, as you've mentioned, but because of a fear that if we actually do try it, guess what? We might succeed. And in that vein, how does that relate to that journey you said just now about deciding you're going to write a book, not knowing how to do it, but just deciding that you're going to do it? The journaling I know helped, but beyond that, how did this all come together for you where you could take everything that you learned in that 10 years and encapsulate it in the book?
Yeah, I think it's critical to surround yourself with people who believe in you, people who have faith, whether it's in you or in a higher being or God, religion, whatever you want to call it. I think that the people that you keep around you sometimes, not sometimes, always have an impact on how you perform and what you can do. And so up until my 20s, let's just say that the cats I rolled with maybe weren't the best support system for me.
Right.
And truthfully, I got to give a lot of credit to my current wife, who I've been with for 13 years. She really helped me realize when I was thinking from a place of fear. Like you just said, you're fearful to succeed, but you can also be paralyzed by fear because you think you're going to fail. And what she really taught me was you just got to go for it. And in the journey, you're going to fail. And from that failure is going to come an abundance of growth. And I probably didn't answer your question directly there, because now you got me thinking about how amazing my wife is. But, but yeah, like you said, you sit around and you're paralyzed by fear, whether it's
Right.
fear of failure or fear of success. You're paralyzed by that, and you have to just jump into it and understand that the greatest people throughout history, at one point or another, they were all looked at as failures. And to do something great, I think you have to fail to take those steps forward and learn more about yourself and really get comfortable with fear and get comfortable with being uncomfortable, if you will.
Right.
But yeah, that's the best I can answer that.
No, I think you answered it perfectly, because it's your experience, and that's, of course, what we're here to glean. And I'll tell you this, though, that thing about that inner saboteur that I mentioned earlier, I believe that there is an essential nature within each of us where we either buy into what we're told, going back to where we started this conversation, or we have what I call an aggressive sense of self-awareness and value, where we know who we are. I think it was Marianne Williamson who once says that, our greatest fear is that we are more powerful than we know, as opposed to being weaker than what we know. And so that ability to individually look at something and say, I don't care what the world thinks, I'm going forward. That's something that's developed not only because of the people that you're around, because of a loving spouse like you have, but there's something inherently available within your spirit that you can tap into. So for instance, when you get into a situation where things are difficult or it's confrontational, obstacles are thrown in your way, it's the difference between saying, oh, screw it, I want nothing else to do with this, and saying instead, I don't know how I'm going to figure this out, but dang it, I'm going to. Is that how you would approach it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for a long time, I did not. And when I did fail, I focused on that failure, and that created a negative vibration. And then you're just continuing to go down that road. But like you said, if you realize what it is when it's happening, a lot of us are scared of things that we don't understand. For me in particular, when you don't understand something, you have a tendency to ridicule it. You have a tendency to criticize it. And what you really have to learn to do, and what I suggest to people, is learn how to embrace those. It doesn't matter that you don't know what it is or you don't know how to do it. Like you just said, you have spirit within, and that spirit is so dang powerful. It scares people when they start to see that and they just suppress it. But like you said, you just have to lean into those challenges. And for me, when I started doing that, it's almost as if the world shifted, and you feel almost like a giraffe walking amongst field mice, I like to say. Because you create, like you said, Charles, you create this awareness of knowing that it's okay. And everything is going exactly how you have manifested it to go. Your thoughts and the way that you think and go about things draw to you exactly how that journey is supposed to be. So I think it really just comes down to how you look at it. Like you said, what's your awareness? Are you thinking about things from a positive mindset? Or are you looking at them from a negative mindset?
And I think that also aligns with the idea of knowing who you are. It's interesting to me because I think there are so many people who are aspiring to be something that someone else will consider valuable or important that they don't know who they are. And I do an exercise where I tell people that my true self goes back to a 10-year-old kid who was having a tough time in life. And a very basic wish that he had, not just for himself, but for his mother and for his family, that they never had to be in a position where they were going to have to deal with that again. Everything that I am today, I can take back to that very specific moment when I realized that there was another opportunity in life other than the one that I was experiencing. So even though I'm way past 10 years old now, I guarantee you the simplicity of that logic and what happened in that time informs every decision I make today. Because, why? It made it clear to me that there was a reason for me. I was on purpose. And because I'm on purpose, there must be something bigger for me to do than suffer here on this planet. How do you respond to that?
That resonates with me a lot. I too, at a young age, but because of my own thinking, kind of suppressed that. I too, at a young age, felt, my dad always tells me, you always talked about, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to be a millionaire. I'm going to change the world. I'm going to be so successful. People know me and all this stuff. And you think back to those moments, and the same driving force that you had was the same thing for me. I didn't want people, I questioned my worth due to the situation with my biological mother. I was very blessed where I had a stepmother come into my life around the age of 6, but that still stuck with me for a long time into my, into my teens. And it just really resonates going back to your 10-year-old self, because I tell people that a lot. When I'll ask people, and I try not to make it too much of a pressure question, but it seems to cook people when you ask. I just ask, what's your definite purpose in life? And people some people know, which is wonderful, but a lot of people struggle with that. And I usually follow up with the question, think back to when you were a kid. What did you really, really want? And for some reason, that starts to get people going, and it brings people back to whatever that was at childhood. So yeah, the original question, sorry, I got a little off track.
That's all right. We're good.
I think it really helps to go back to your childhood and think about, what did you used to want versus 20 years you fast forward and all these people told you what you should be or what you could be, and you kind of lose track of that.
Right. And, the thing I think is equally important, Alex, is when we encounter people now, and it's this whole age of judgment we live in, either we're judging ourselves or we're judging other people, right? And we'll come across someone who's going through something, and we'll look at them tensely and we'll say, what's wrong with you? And I happen to believe that the question is more often than not the most appropriate question when you ask, what happened to you? What happened to you at some point that made you have this type of perspective on the world? And always to your point, when you go back, and what happened to you is not necessarily a negative connotation, but there are things that happened in formative years that we never got over, we never dealt with, we never addressed, and they bubble up as we move on into maturity. That's the reason you can find people who are younger who are going through it, but you can find people who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who still have not reconciled what happened to them by dealing with it. When you speak in terms of desire, let's get a little bit interpersonal here in the context of the relationship with yourself. How much of a role does authenticity, what I like to call direct honesty, play in choosing to pursue that desire because you know you have some things to work through before you can do it?
Yeah. Authenticity. Yes, that's a big one for a while that I struggled with, was being myself. Like you referred to, you have so much judgment, you have so many people, and I was guilty of it for a long time. It still can creep in at times. But really being authentic and knowing who you want to be and not caring what other people think about it. I have a new thing that someone told me that I loved, which was, what other people think about you is none of your damn business.
Exactly. Bravo.
And I don't give a damn what people think, because I know that I am a reflection of God. I am made in God's image. And I know that I have unique talents. And I also know, as I approach other people now, whether they know it or not, they have unique talents. And those talents, if you're not letting them out, you're doing a disservice to the world. Because whether, let's say you're born with a disability, maybe you're born with, something that they say you're not, let's say I was diagnosed with ADHD at a young age, and you're told all these things about what you're not, instead of people telling you what you are or the great gifts that you have. Right. So I think you're doing a disservice to the world if you're not authentically yourself and unapologetically yourself in a positive way. You don't want to show everyone your demons and let those be who you are. But I think all of us have unique gifts inside of us that we need to show the world.
Right. And that is a power. It's a superpower, actually. And it's not, as we both agreed, an easy thing to do, because the world wants to shape you. All the different areas, all the different categories, people want you to fall into an easily labeled box. And they want you to stay there because that makes it easier for them to figure out how they're going to deal with you. So as an add-on to your comment about, what other people think of me is none of my business, I always say, however, there's a little bit of a caveat, which I think you will agree with. I don't care about what anyone thinks aside from the people who I know love me and who I love, because they've already invested that part in it, right? So you've got, your lovely wife, and you've got your new son, 9-month-old son, and you've got other people in your life who feel that way. So you will listen to them. But even sometimes people with the best of intentions go the wrong route. And you've got to stay true to yourself, even when the people who love you sometimes will give you advice, which also isn't easy, but it's necessary. That's part of that fire that burns in the belly when it comes to the type of desire that you think about and that you're written about so lovely here. How individuals can still stay true to that self, still not be an asshole about it, to your point, but at the same time say, I know this is what's intended for me. Talk to me about that a little bit, Alex.
Yeah, the part you said about the caveat of your loved ones being the people you care about, or you care about their opinion a little bit more, or you listen to their advice a little more. I completely agree with that. Right. Like you said, I think you also have to be a little cautious, because although the people who love you care about your well-being, they too were programmed a certain way. Right. And they too may not even realize what they're doing to you. And
Mm-hmm.
really with the birth of my son, I really started looking at this, even something as simple as, he's learning to stand. And when he's about to fall, I'll find myself, oh, wait, oh, no. And what I'm understanding about that is I'm actually teaching him a little bit of worry and fear.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay, dude. You can fall over. You're going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm learning that although the people in my life love me and care about me, I cannot let their influence and their opinion change who I know that I am and
Right.
who I want to grow into.
Mm.
And so, answering your question about how do you stick to it even with other people's opinions and such, you really just have to have this. For me, I know in my heart and in my spirit what I'm meant for and what I'm meant to do and how I'm meant to live. And I know that ultimately I'm meant to live to serve other people and to help the world, the same way one of my favorite guys, Jesus Christ, did. He was misunderstood.
Right.
He was persecuted. He was judged. He literally went through hell on earth for us. And I look at that and I always think, how did he never break? It would have been so easy for him to break and for him to conform with the masses.
Mm.
And so a lot of times when I'm questioning my own journey, or is this really what I'm supposed to do? Oh, well, my mom said this, or my stepmom, but I call her my mom.
Gotcha.
She's been in my life for so long. So my mom said this, or my dad thinks that, or, oh, my sister didn't like the way this was. And you just have to realize their intention is good, but their own paradigms and their own thought processes create them to say things. They're expressing their inner feeling outward towards you. And you just have to respect it. And if you don't like it, you block it out and you think something else and you keep moving forward. But yeah, I go back to Jesus a lot and just think like, you have to stay true to what your purpose is.
Right.
And your family loves you, but they can be poisonous at times too.
Exactly. Well, yeah, isn't that the truth? There's an old, well, you're a younger person, so I don't know if you'll know the reference, but there was a humorous writer named Irma Bombeck, and she used to refer to family as not only the tie that binds, but it's also the one that can gag you. So there's that to take into consideration.
Absolutely.
In the book, you cite a number of people who are very well known. I mean, you can't beat the example, of course, of Jesus that you just gave, but outside of that, you've got a lot of famous people, well-known people who have shown their desire and manifest so many different things. And I know a lot of people look at that because there is the level of fame and celebrity that goes with it. But I wanted to talk to you as well about the examples you've seen of people who are not necessarily well known, but who still lead this kind of life that others among us can aspire to. And they may not be rich, they may not be famous, but they're still on purpose. Talk to me a little bit about those examples and what we can take from those examples that is equally important from what we can take from those who are rich and famous and successful by general terms.
Definitely. The examples I use in the book, which I did on purpose of well-known people, was so that everybody could kind of relate, because they know who those people are.
Right.
But truth be told, those people are never the ones that really inspired me. Those are the ones that are just at the top that have great stories. But the ones that really inspired me are, I'll use my father as an example. In 1989, when I was born, he started a business that was a cleaning company. And his father and mother didn't have a ton of belief in it. They thought, oh, what, you're just going to be a cleaning guy. What's that going to do? And my father knew that he never wanted me to have a bad life from a financial perspective. He always wanted me to be taken care of, have food on the table, a roof over my head. And I never understood it until I got older. And he's really a big part of my journey in writing this book. And I wrote a little bit about him in the dedication page. But my dad started this business in 1989 with a small little truck and some cleaning stuff. And he's now turned it into a multi-million-dollar business where he services fire hydrants, water towers, underground water stations. And he does work with municipalities and with government agencies. So it's all, public work where he helps take care of communities. And as I've gotten older, I've discussed with him, how did you do it? You didn't graduate college. You didn't know what you were going to do. Right. And he said, well, I just had an idea that I could help people make things look better. And when things look better, it makes people feel better. And I wanted to make people feel better.
Ah, wow.
And when he and he didn't explain it exactly that way, but that's what I took from it. And when I really sat down and thought about that, I'm like, well, son of a gun, this is what so many people miss. They're so worried about the money and the fame and the fortune that they don't realize you can do something so small like cleaning and refurbishing things, and it makes people feel good.
Right.
It serves people to a point where the money just comes to you. And so I don't want to make this story too long, but, from 1989 until the early 2000s, he was just grinding his butt off. And he was always looking for the next job, looking for the next greatest thing, making sure that he was always on top of his game, acquiring specialized knowledge about products and services he could offer, marketing and sales and all that stuff. And now the last 10 years, he's been able to sit back and take a breath and enjoy the fruits of his labor, if you will. And so he's one of my biggest inspirations for going after your desire. Everybody doubted him. Everybody thought that he'd just be another cleaning guy or, whatever you want to call that. And he proved them all wrong. And I think that's part of where sometimes people can say I pursue things with a chip on my shoulder, where I won't let anybody, I just kind of keep going. And I think I got that from my father's story, to be a single parent for the first 6 years of my life and open up a business to provide for his children. And then you fast forward 33 years later, and the fruits of his labor are showing. It just shows you that you have to start somewhere, and it's going to be a rough road. But if you keep grinding through it and you keep working towards it, you will be rewarded in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that story. And I think it's exactly the example that I wanted to hear you speak to, because people tend to forget that we all are vessels of capability when it comes to having a desire and also having an impact on other people. And I think, Alex, the thing that is so beneficial about what you've put together in your book is that you make it easy for other people to understand where they can go with it. Sometimes we only have this kind of level of aspiration where everybody has to be here. But I believe, as do you, that anyone, anywhere can make a difference, can have a desire. And it's not necessarily always the same thing. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask you, in summary, as we get ready to kind of wrap up here, tell the viewers and listeners where they can find Desire Unleashed. By the way, the subtitle is The Starting Point to Achieving Your Wildest Dreams. I love the fact that you say wildest dreams. So tell us, where can we find the book?
So yes, right now it is available on Amazon. I am looking forward to turning it into an audiobook. I'm a big fan of Audible, and I've gotten some feedback from some people that they think this would be a great listen. So currently it's available on Amazon. You can also reach out to me directly on social media, and I can get you a copy of it that way. But right now, the best way to get it is just going to Amazon and typing Desire Unleashed by Alex Giarrante. And I hope people enjoy it. And ultimately, I hope it helps people realize that you truly can do anything if you have the desire behind it.
Yeah. And I think that's what brought us together. You and I had never heard of each other before we heard of each other, right? And I believe that the universe, God, whatever people choose to label it, always conspires to make sure that things that are supposed to happen, happen. I do not believe in coincidences. And I read your book with a great deal of enthusiasm. I kind of came to what I do here and in other means through a similar set of experiences. And ultimately, it led to me saying, I have something that I am required to do. It isn't something that I choose to do necessarily. It's something I'm required to do. Because once it started, it's mushroomed into books, into this podcast, into all kinds of things. And I see this happening with you as well, more because it's the type of experience where people can listen and, understand what you're saying today, go out and buy this book and literally change their lives because you give them the tools to make that possible. And I thank you for that because a lot of people are so selfish today. It's so ridiculous how selfish people are. So to find someone who's willing to give something in return makes all the difference. Is there something that you'd like to leave our viewers and listeners with today about desire that they need to know specifically from you?
Yeah, I think I'll close out and keep it pretty simple. As I said at the beginning, desire really is the starting point to all achievement in life. And once you figure out what your desire is, as you just said, Charles, you'll never look back because you'll realize when you start living your desire, it is your responsibility to share it with the world and to serve the world. And so whether you figured out what your desire is or you're looking to figure out what it is, if you do read this book and you do apply those principles, I can promise you your desire will come true. So I will end with that.
I think that's the way to wrap it, my friend. And let me thank you again for the time you've spent with us today. I know you're a very busy guy, so finding time to do this is very important to me. So thank you for joining us on the podcast. And everyone, go out and buy Desire Unleashed, learn something, grow somehow, and take the advice that Alex is giving you to heart because I'm telling you, it can change your life. Thanks again, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PoolePRoof Wisdom Podcast. We always enjoy the company. Be sure to listen, like, subscribe, and share using Google and Apple Podcasts, Audible, Spotify, Anchor, Overcast, YouTube, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this episode, we'd appreciate it very much if you simply tell a friend about the podcast too. Spread the word. Until next time, keep on living.